both the challenges to do with pollution, but also potential. And so I'm really looking forward to understanding more about what these effects have been and how are we tackling them now and in the future. And I'll hand over to Rob. Rob?
Well, good evening, everyone. I'd like to add my welcome to that of Hisham. Welcome you to this meeting. My name is Rob Mackenzie. I'm a professor of atmospheric science at the university here. I'm also the director of the Birmingham Institute of Forest Research, which may or may not turn out to be relevant in the coming hour and a half. We'll just see where the conversation takes us. I'm here to chair this evening's activities. We're here on Clean Air Day. We can celebrate Clean Air Day, I think, because in fact, as I look out the window and as I've moved around today, I've got the feeling that the air is reasonably clean today, because we've had a good deal of rain and we've got some northerly winds blowing some air in from remote regions. So I suppose that's something that we should be thankful for and that we can celebrate. But I think we also are here because we recognise that clean air is not something that we and UK citizens, and in fact citizens globally, are not fortunate enough to breathe every day. And so we need to think about what action we can make to improve that situation. The UK government recognises that clean air is an issue, that air pollution is a problem. And like most countries across the world, it has come to realise, thanks to research that's been done across the world, that air pollution is the largest environmental health risk we face in the world today. So sometimes it's a little bit difficult to hang on to that idea when we're continuously surrounded by air, and it doesn't often cause us to just fall down dead. So we're here celebrating Clean Air Day. Clean Air Day is the UK's largest air pollution campaign. So it's all about campaigning, about trying to get things done, engaging communities, schools, businesses, individuals to improve our understanding and also our awareness, and thinking about what actions we can do. And talking about actions, those of you who like tweeting, one action that you might want to undertake through the next hour and a half is, oh, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze, I think. Maybe I'll try and turn off my mic if that sneeze comes back in a minute. The hashtag for the tweets today is hashtag Clean Air Day UOB, all one word. So I want to welcome you and welcome our speakers and panelists. Welcome Bill Bloss, Waseem Zaffar, Clare Maltby, Ali Bell, and Shivaji Shiva. And to begin our series of talks today, it's my pleasure to welcome my friend and colleague, Professor William Bill Bloss, who's an atmospheric chemist of world renown. And that's taken him to do research in very, very clean environments and also some of the dirtiest environments in the world. And he leads the WM Air project, which is a project focused on air quality in the West Midlands region. So I'm very pleased to have him speak today. Thank you, Bill.
Great, thank you very much, Rob. Good evening, everyone. I will just share my screen, and hopefully that is working and you're looking at a couple of photographs of Birmingham. So what I want to do in the next 10 minutes is tell you a little story of what happened in terms of our air quality during the COVID lockdowns earlier this year, and maybe reflect a little bit on what that tells us and what we can learn from that in terms of future plans, particularly for our transport and how we move around our cities. So the focus of what I'm going to talk about is two particular air pollutants. And those are nitrogen dioxide gas, or NO2, and fine particles, or PM2.5. NO2 is emitted when we burn things at high temperatures. And the main source in most of our cities is internal combustion engines in petrol and diesel powered vehicles. PM2.5 are the smallest particles, which are small enough for us to inhale down into our lungs. And they're produced from a range of sources, which include traffic, but also wider industrial, domestic, and agricultural sources. We're interested in them because NO2 levels exceed UK legal limits in many of our cities, and PM2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization guidelines in many places in the UK. And the consequence of that is that we, across the country, have an average reduction in life expectancy of 4 to 6 months due to exposure to outdoor air pollution, which translates into something like 35,000 excess deaths each year. And a really important point about these air pollutants is there's no safe level or threshold. We gain health benefits, whatever reductions in their concentrations we achieve. So that's the background. What happened back in March when the coronavirus lockdown started was we had a very significant reduction in activity across our economy, most notably in terms of transport on our roads. So the plot you can see here shows you road traffic levels in Birmingham, which fell by something like 60 to 70% by the end of March. The red dots on here are traffic levels during the weekdays and the blue dots at weekends. And you can see we then had a recovery period through to June where this data continues. And if I switch to a more national picture, this shows traffic levels on our roads from the start of March until last week. And you can see the car and HGV traffic has more or less recovered. Bus journeys are rising. This is data outside of London. And interestingly, of course, there was a big increase in active travel, in cycling, although some of that is now dipping down with the autumn. So as that traffic change and other activity change was driven by the lockdown restrictions, we saw changes in our air quality. And the simplest way to look at those is to compare what we saw this year with what we've seen in previous years. So the pictures here show you NO2 and PM2.5 during 2020 in the blue line, during the March to May peak lockdown period, and comparing this with the average of 2017 to 2019 in the red line. So we can see very clearly there were significantly lower levels of NO2 and a little bit lower levels of PM2.5 at this particular monitoring station, which is on the Birmingham Ring Road. So that seems reasonably clear cut, but the story is a little bit more complicated than that because we need to think about the weather. The weather has a very big impact on the link between air pollution emissions and the air pollutant concentrations in the air that we breathe. And if we look at that weather, this year, 2020, was actually quite an outlier in terms of climatology. And it's hard to remember now, but back in January and February, we were talking about extreme flooding events and Storm Dennis, Storm Jorge. And then, of course, that switched to the very favourable, very fine weather during the sort of April-May period. And you can see the cause of that on the picture on the left-hand slide here. So what this is showing you is where the wind came from as measured at Heathrow Airport, but it's pretty typical across the UK. Averaged from the start of the year to the 23rd of March on the left, and from the 23rd of March to mid-May on the right. So during the early winter, January, February, the wind came mostly from the southwest, as we'd expect, and it brought the wet and windy weather. But pretty much at the same time as the COVID lockdown began, the weather changed and the wind began to come predominantly from the northeast and bring air from Europe across the UK. And that changed the background levels of pollutants in the air that we encountered in our towns and in our cities. So what we can do is to try and adjust for the impact of meteorology to understand what the effect of the lockdown changes was, the traffic changes. And we can use a model which we can train to predict the air quality concentrations based upon the observed weather factors. And then we can see how that prediction compares during the lockdown period when emissions have changed. And that's what you can see on the picture here. So what you're looking at in blue is our prediction for the air pollution levels, in this case, NOx concentrations at a site in Birmingham. And the left-hand bit of the panel from January to March shows you that the blue model predictions were replicating the observed levels in red. So everything's working and doing what it should do. But then things change after the lockdown, after the dashed line. And you can see the blue prediction is now higher than the red observation. So the blue prediction assumes that everything is carrying on the same as it had before, that emissions haven't varied for that time of year. While as in fact they've changed, and the difference between those blue and red lines is the impact of the emission reductions from the reductions in activity during the lockdown. So we can take that change and predict what that means for air quality across a city. So this is a map of the changes in NO2 levels across Birmingham, which we'd expect during 2020 overall if the traffic recovery continued in the way it had been doing as the lockdown restrictions eased off. So those of you familiar with the city will recognise that the lines on this map look very much like the strategic road network. So we have the M6 across the top, we have the ring road around Birmingham city centre, and the A38 coming out through the middle here. And you can see that this analysis predicts reductions in NO2 levels for this very abnormal 2020 year of up to 20% in the most polluted areas of the city, with somewhat lower but still significant areas on the outskirts where we're further away from the emission sources. So what this tells us overall is that road traffic has reduced very significantly during the lockdown, maybe by about 65%, but has since then rebounded more or less to usual levels by some measures. Linked to that, we expect other emissions associated with industry and power generation would also have reduced, but we're focusing on road traffic here. That led to a reduction in roadside NO2 levels, so at monitoring stations which are located in close proximity to major roads, by up to 40%. So we've got a smaller reduction in NO2 than we had in traffic, in part because of weather effects, and in part because of the way the atmosphere behaves, shifts the partitioning between NO2 and other pollutants. So what this tells us, it demonstrates that changes in local transport, either in the amount of transport activity or where that activity is taking place, or the mode of transport, will deliver local air quality benefits for NO2. And there will have been associated reductions in tailpipe CO2 emissions alongside the NO2 reductions. The situation for PM 2.5 is more complicated because the fine particles last longer in the atmosphere, and so they're more affected by the wind transporting them from sources to the locations where we breathe them in. There have been reductions, but it's harder to unpick the local, regional, national, and international impacts and influences. And finally, just to comment that our exposure to air pollution will have changed as well, because many of us were working in a different way, some of us working from home, so we'll have been more impacted by the air quality in our homes and to a different extent by air quality outside compared to our usual way of going about our lives. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an insight into how air quality changed during the lockdown. and maybe a hint about what that tells us about how changes in the way we travel can feed directly into the air quality in our cities. And that's where I'll finish, and I'll hand back to Rob. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Bill. Yeah, that last point you made was exactly what I was writing down just a moment ago, that it really shows the magnitude of the change that we are challenging ourselves to make. Thanks very much, Bill. We're going to move on now to our next talk. So we're just going to continue going through our talks. Please do populate the Q&A tab with questions, and we'll try and find the answers once we go to the panel session. But let's get some questions in there. We've had some come in by email even ahead of the meeting, so don't worry about getting started and getting stuck in. There are some already in there, so we've got stuff to go at. But next, I'm going to move on to our next speaker, and it's my pleasure to introduce Councillor Waseem Zaffar, who's the Birmingham City Council Cabinet Member for Transport and the Environment, and he's got an unashamedly firm grip on that portfolio and pioneering some really ambitious plans to reverse health inequalities, particularly by thinking about active travel and really pushing all the ways in which we can drive down air pollution and begin to enjoy the air in our city again. So over to you, Councillor.
Thanks, Rob. Can I start by thanking the University of Birmingham, not just for organising this evening's event, but for the work that you do in our city and across the region and across the country. You are a shining light on the work that you do, particularly around supporting us and our attempts to clean up the air within the city. I'm going to hopefully run through a fairly straightforward presentation. I'm sorry to those who may have come across some of this information previously, but I've been asked to talk about the Emergency Birmingham Transport Plan and also the future policy direction that the council is leading on within the city. Back in January 2020, we published the draft Birmingham Transport Plan out for consultation. And whilst we were still out for consultation, in March, we reached COVID and the pandemic and the emergency that was created within there. But we had considerable amount of responses on the draft Birmingham Transport Plan, which is looking at how we can just fundamentally differ the way goods and people move across our city by focusing on inclusive, sustainable growth, by focusing on how we can together improve air quality, and also our target of becoming carbon neutral by 2030 as a city too. In Birmingham, one of the challenges and one of the sort of shocking statistics I came across a few years back was on any normal day in Birmingham, a quarter of the journeys by car are under a mile long. And it's how we can convert the vast majority of those journeys away from car to more active travel modes such as walking and cycling. And for those longer trips, those trips over a mile, we want to make public transport the preferred choice in our city. We want to discourage the use of private car, and particularly just focusing a bit more on this. We want to rebalance the relationship that the car has in our city because of the over-reliance. And we want to ensure that Birmingham's workers and residents have sustainable green options. There's no point us saying that we want to do this without having the options available in our city. So during COVID, and quite clearly, the government were very keen to take advantage of the window of opportunity that we were getting. And Bill's presentation was showing the increase in cycling in particular and walking within our city and across the country. So we published the Emergency Birmingham Transport Plan. Partners across the city came together with us, and at the council we carried out a piece of work following on from the principles of the draft Birmingham Transport Plan, where we wanted Birmingham's transport to be a sustainable, green, inclusive, go anywhere network, and for a low carbon, clean air recovery from COVID itself. And we particularly focused on active travel in the city. We've carried out a number of projects already, and we wanted to also work with our partners, particularly National Express, the major bus provider, to ensure that we can maintain safe public transport services for those that need it. I know the government were really keen that we should discourage people from using buses, but for some, it's the only way they can maintain and travel to from their destinations, particularly work. So the draft Birmingham Transport Plan and the Emergency Transport Plan share the same 4 big moves. Big move number 1 is reallocating road space away from single occupancy private cars to create safer space for walking, cycling and social distancing, while maintaining that public transport provision that is so important and vital to our city. In terms of big move number 2 is looking at transforming the city centre, where walking and cycling and public transport start to dominate, in particular in terms of through journeys through our city centre. Big move number 3 was looking at how we can prioritise active travel in local neighbourhoods, particularly looking at how we could have people start to dominate neighbourhoods and not necessarily car. We've started to look at how we can introduce some low traffic neighbourhoods in a couple of neighbourhoods, which has triggered interesting conversations in Kings Heath and Lozells. And we also want to look at how we can manage demand through parking measures. We know that the accessibility and the price of parking really determines whether either you drive into a particular place or whether you look at sustainable modes and transport. So within literally a few weeks within tranche 1 of the Active Travel Fund, we've been able to deliver temporary pop-up cycle lanes on priority cycle routes that were identified on the walking and cycling strategy that we published last year. So there's approximately 15 kilometers of pop-up cycle lanes that have suddenly appeared in the city and are pretty well used. So the Places for People program is looking at creating low traffic neighbourhoods, and as I've just said, Lozells and Kings Heath are the 2 pilots, and we're looking in tranche 2 to build upon those pilots. The reallocation of road space and ensuring that we've got pavement widening for local high streets, we carry that very, very quickly too, to ensure that people can shop, and where you've got quite busy areas, particularly around supermarkets, that was really, really important too. The City Centre Traffic Cells Initiative, we had quite a lot of commentary when we announced these ideas at the start of the year, and we were able to start to pilot some of those measures where obviously public transport, walking and cycling start to take priority when you move across the city centre. And we've doubled the number of car-free school streets. They were particularly popular when we launched them last year, and that's looking at, again, creating a safe environment outside schools and ensuring that every school in our city, ensuring that we're on that mission where every school in our city is a safe haven in terms of air quality too. So we're working with a number of other transport providers for a number of different modes of transport. So we're looking at how we can reduce the dependency on private car by promoting other means. So as part of our work with partners, we're looking at rolling out the Sprint Bus rapid transit routes, and with the A34 and the A38 being the pilot area, we want to ensure that we've got that in place before the Commonwealth Games in 22. We're working very closely with Transport for West Midlands to ensure that we've got new and improved rail stations across the city, particularly around the Camp Hill lines stations. National Express, I know Ali's going to speak shortly, they've rolled out fully electric buses on a number of routes, particularly the 6th route from Birmingham to Solihull. We also have very pleased to join a partnership with Right Bus and National Express to have hydrogen buses within our city. We'll be buying 20 hydrogen buses costing £500,000 each. We really think that hydrogen as a way of cleaning up the air is a real alternative to, here in Birmingham. We've also recently announced the installation of a network of 394 charging points for electrical cars, particularly supporting the electrification of our taxi fleet. We've got the e-scooter pilot. We're one of the cities across the country that's taken this option on. It's been an interesting launch to that. And in the coming weeks, we'll get the e-cargo bike pilot at University of Birmingham, and a number of other partners across the city are supporting us on as well. So there's quite a holistic approach we're taking. It's not just one particular area. We're looking at how we can work with partners to bring forward a number of measures that help us clean up the air. So moving forward in terms of our future policy direction, we're working incredibly hard to get a fully costed action plan together as part of our work around climate change, which will come through by the end of the year. We want to reduce the car use as part of our planning process. I always say that parked cars are probably the biggest waste of space we've got in the city, and it's how we can use that space a lot better. We want to obviously deliver the big moves of the draft Birmingham Transport Plan, And we will do that by adopting the Birmingham Transport Plan and also formally adopting our clean air strategy for Birmingham. And some of you may have seen news that we've today announced the implementation date for the government mandated clean air zone, which will now be the 1st of June 2021. And we've got in the region of, I think, £35 million worth of financial incentives for businesses, the taxi community and residents to benefit from, to ensure that they are supported through this challenging policy. So there's quite a bit happening there. I'll stop there, but I just want to pay tribute to the partners. And if we are to achieve the wide range of things I've talked about, we're going to have to ensure that partners are part of this journey with us. And it's not just the council demanding these changes, but to win the hearts and minds of communities, or win the hearts and minds of other stakeholders in the city. It's really, really important that we all pull together for the benefit of the city. Rob, I'll hand back over to you and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Waseem. That was terrific. And thank you to everyone in the audience. You didn't need much encouragement, did you? So lots of stuff coming through now, which is fantastic. And Suzanne Bartington, who's the brains behind tonight, is going to be sifting through those questions and answers and trying to help us shape things for the panel session that's coming up later. What I might suggest is, and I hope this isn't going to break things, but I think it's quite good to see chat coming through, whether, you know, in a kind of thumbs up, thumbs down kind of way. So if you've got a comment that isn't a question, then I think it's perfectly, and as long as it's within, with due respect to everyone in the audience, please do use the chat function for that. And then for the questions, let's get those in the Q&A slot. So thanks very much for that. Okay, we're going to press on. Our next speaker is Clare Maltby, who's the England Director for the Midlands and the East of Sustrans. And Sustrans is an interesting organisation. It's got a fantastic vision statement, which is about a vision of a society where the way we travel creates healthier places and happier lives for everyone. So I think that's a really interesting, positive spin on what we're about this evening, and I'm sure we'll hear more of that from Clare herself as she speaks. So thank you. Over to you, Clare.
Thanks so much, Rob. I'm just sharing my screen, so hopefully that's coming through now. Okay. Thanks for the introduction. In my 10-minute slot, I wanted to talk about some solutions and our ideas for how we can improve air quality through creating livable cities and towns. Rob's just introduced Sustrans, but for those who aren't familiar with us, we're a national charity making it easier for people to walk and cycle. And our work is focused on 2 strategic priorities over the next 5 years. So one of these is livable cities and towns for everyone. And that means places that connect us to each other and what we need, where everyone can thrive without needing a car. So just to expand that a little bit more, livable cities and towns means designing urban spaces that have social connection, that deliver 20-minute neighbourhoods, that focus on health, clean air and green space, and where everyone can move around healthily. And we see these things as really important. They're not just aspirational, they're vital, because the way we travel has a tremendous impact on people and on places. And some of the biggest challenges facing urban leaders right now are connected to the way we travel. So air quality is one of these challenges, and reducing car use is a really important way to tackle air quality, and it helps with many other issues as well. So I'm just going to cover these very briefly because I know people will be familiar. But climate change, transport is now the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases in the UK. Now that's not a great title to be holding, is it? And our carbon targets will not be met without reducing the amount of car travel. So many local councils across the UK have declared climate emergencies, and now we need to see that backed up with action, real implementation. Further to that, we've got the crises in public health and well-being. We need to create places that improve air quality, road safety, and opportunities to achieve good physical and mental health. In terms of health, it's well documented that physical inactivity increases conditions like heart disease and diabetes. And yet 8 out of 10 people do not do the recommended level of physical activity. And the fact is that the poorer people are, the less likely they are to manage to do that. So greater vehicle use causes higher levels of air pollution, which is self-evident really. And air pollution has already been mentioned earlier on. It's killing tens of thousands of people prematurely across the UK every year. 4.5 million children in the UK are growing up in areas with illegal levels of air pollution. And where legal limits are being broken, road transport is responsible for 80% of the nitrous dioxide pollution. And it's not just burning the fuel that causes the problem. So much of the particulate matter actually comes from tyre and brake wear. So even if we switched all of our vehicles to electric, we'd still have a really damaging amount of fine dust from vehicles. And as been mentioned earlier, the COVID-19 pandemic has really brought these health impacts into focus even more sharply. We also have issues around social isolation and inequality. So we know that if you design places for cars, you get cars. If you design for people, you get people. Loneliness is a major health and wellbeing issue nationally. And where neighbourhoods are severed by major roads and blighted by high levels of traffic and danger and noise, it deters the kind of social interaction. It's actually the glue that connects people and our communities together. We've seen data that improving London high streets for walking and cycling led to a 200% increase in people stopping, sitting and socialising. So, place and how we use transport is an important part of that isolation and that loneliness. So the way we travel is critical to some of these really urgent problems that we're facing. And for years, we have designed places around cars, not people. The benefits of walking and cycling are also not experienced fairly. And we want to see that change. No one should be facing barriers to living and moving well. Our cities must be inclusive and they must be safe for everyone. And we also feel that urban planning and practice actually needs to take into account a much wider range of voices in order to achieve that. At Sustrans, our vision for change is that working with others, we want to create places that connect us to each other and what we need, and where everyone can thrive without having to use a car. We want to help remove barriers to people making healthier travel choices, whether those barriers are social or economic or physical. And over summer, we welcome the government's gear change document and its ambition to see cycling and walking making up half of all journeys in our towns and cities by 2030. And we know that there's support for this kind of change. So from surveys carried out across the UK, we found that there is huge public support for change to this status quo and to reduce the car dominance on our streets. And there's loads of different facts about this, but just picking out a few here. So 78% of people support taking space away from cars and creating space for walking and cycling. And that's not just a survey of people who already cycle, by the way, that's a general population survey. 83% of UK adults think it's important that action is taken to enable people to have a good standard of living without needing a car. 80% of people say the way that most people travel should be good for the environment and the health of the people who live in cities and towns. And 86% say we can improve mental and physical health by making it easy and attractive to travel safely. More recently, we know that 71% of parents agree that it's essential, so not just a good idea, but essential that local authorities take steps to make it easier for families to walk and cycle to school during COVID-19. And our recent parent survey in the West Midlands of 6,000 families found, again, 70% of parents want their child to walk, scoot or cycle. And of the parents that are driving their children to school right now, half of them would prefer their children to be walking or cycling. So there is mandate for change and there is large levels of support. But despite knowing this, I think it's important to recognise that, change isn't always easy. Often the support for this change is rather quiet, while the dissent can be really quite loud and sometimes quite ugly, particularly if you look at social media. And I think it's worth noting that in the recent context, the speed of the government's rollout of the Emergency Active Travel Fund has created debate. And I think, debate's really good because debate means people are thinking about these issues, they're talking about these issues, and it means that change is happening. And that's exciting. But it's also put decision makers and some of those who are involved in engaging communities under quite a lot of pressure. And I think that needs to be recognised. And for me, the debate points to the importance of having really good engagement. So the need to take people with us on this journey, the need to reach out, and the need for strong political leadership. I think that all of us can take action to make our support for this change that bit louder. You know, we can share our views with friends and with family. We can share our views publicly. You know, we can get in touch with our counsellors. You know, we can do what we can to try to amplify our voice and be heard in these kind of discussions. Another way to move forward, I think, is to get on and demonstrate change. So there's often, you know, quite a bit of opposition to some large change before the event. And then after a change is implemented and bedded in, very few people want it removed, actually. And we saw that, you know, we see that time and again. We saw it with London's congestion charge. We saw it with Waltham Forest and Mini Holland. And I have to say, one of the things I really like about working at Sustrans is that we get busy demonstrating change now. So we do have a small team who are doing that kind of talking to central government and talking to DfT, trying to get the policy environment where it needs to be. But we're not waiting for that perfect policy environment. We're getting busy now showing the art of the possible, working with constructively with councils and with communities to see what's possible and to demonstrate how change can be made. And across the UK, we've got initiatives like school streets, like low traffic neighbourhoods, as well as community co-design projects. And all these things are demonstrating change and allowing people to experience and envision what that looks like. Within Birmingham, we've worked with the City Council and with others to deliver change through our projects like Brumbreaves, Places for People, and Age-Friendly Tyburn. So Age-Friendly Tyburn was a project where we worked with local people over the age of 50, and we explored how the built environment was experienced by those people, and we made recommendations of changes that could help improve mobility and reduce isolation. And some of those changes were to do with extending crossing times on pedestrian crossings, better wayfinding and signage, and low traffic neighbourhoods. And in fact, many of these recommendations have now been picked up in the emergency transport plans, and we're really, really pleased to see that. In Brumbreaves, we've been recruiting, training and supporting air quality champions from across the voluntary and faith group and community sector. And we've supported these volunteers to raise awareness of air pollution and its causes and its solutions and how it affects our health. And that project's ongoing. And exciting news this week is that we've got a new web page for that. So I've put the URL on the link, so please do take a look. And we've also been working with the council on the Places for People, which is the low traffic neighbourhoods engaging the communities in Castle Vale, Lascelles and Bourneville. So we support the ambition of the Emergency Active Travel Fund in Birmingham and nationally. And we believe that our recovery from the COVID crisis can be a catalyst for positive, long-lasting change in the way we move and the way we live. And it could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really take a fresh look at our streets and our public places and reduce this dependence on cars. And these are changes that we've been calling for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. And do please put that Brumbreaves web link into the chat if you haven't already, just to so that people can easily click through onto it. I think that idea of being at a moment of potential change is a really interesting one, and I wonder if that's something that we'll come back to as we go into our panel discussion. As Claire was speaking, an old song began to sort of ring in my mind. It's an old Queen song, so you'll have to be of a certain age and a certain disposition to get this reference, but it's an old Queen song called I'm in Love with My Car. And I don't know whether that's some kind of weird shadow side sort of psyche thing that was playing in my head there, or whether we're just going to be able to look at songs like that in the future and see them as kind of bizarre, truly bizarre cultural artifacts. Anyway, I should be introducing our next speaker instead of indulging in 1980s pop chat. So our next speaker is the head of external communications for National Express West Midlands. She's Ali Bell. Ali, it's a real pleasure to have Ali with us, and a speaker from National Express. They're taking a really serious approach to air pollution. They've undertaken never to buy another diesel bus, amongst other things, and I'm sure we'll hear what those other things are from Ali herself. So without further ado, I think I'll pass over to you, Ali, and hear it from you directly rather than me go through it with my notes.
Thank you, Rob, and happy Clean Air Day, everybody. So my kind of internal title for my 10 minutes is Air Quality is about inequality. See what I did there? So when I first heard about this session, I thought the title was really interesting because it's COVID and clean air and mobility. And I think for us at National Express running all the buses, lockdown really kind of brought into sharp focus how those three things are really linked. We kind of knew it, but we were clearly demonstrated that these three things are inextricable. So during lockdown, a lot of kind of white collar workers were kind of sat at their dining room tables on their laptops. Meanwhile, out on our buses, we were carrying 750,000 people every week. That was in July when we were supposed to be staying at home, because these are the key workers. You know, 75% of our bus users cannot do their work from home. They are people doing actual jobs that you can't do from your dining room table. And one of the few nice things about this horrible pandemic lockdown was that these key workers got to work quicker, because as we saw from Professor Bloss, there was hardly any traffic on the roads. So their journeys were kind of taking half the time. So for example, a nurse that lives in Northfield gets the bus to Priory Queensway in Birmingham city centre to go to work at the Children's Hospital. Before lockdown, that journey was taking 51 minutes on the bus. You know, it's not far, but because of the traffic, that's how long it takes. During lockdown, it was 23 minutes quicker, that's 45%, and it was taking about 28 minutes. So even if you just get 10 minutes quicker to work, 10 minutes back, that's 20 minutes every day. Every 3 days, you get an hour back. In a 5-day week, you get 1 hour 40 back. That is a 7-hour working day every month. So given holidays and stuff, that's 10 or 12 days a year that these key workers were spending not going to work on their way to work. So now that the cars are back on the roads, you know, the DFT figures have got traffic climbing back to way over 90% these days. These people are losing their time again. You know, that was time they could have spent at home. Now they're spending it sat in traffic. So we all clapped for them on a Thursday night, didn't we? And we all got our kids to do rainbows, and we put some of those on our buses, people put them in their windows. But I guess what we would say is, how about doing something real and meaningful for those key workers now? Let them have their time back, let them spend their time with their families by making the buses quicker. Doesn't cost a lot. Speeding up buses is as simple as letting the buses through. You know, bus lanes are always good. Birmingham City Council's got a lovely one in Harborne that speeds up journeys by 8 minutes, which is quite a lot when you think about how long a journey is. And since that was done, we've seen it's become more attractive to travel by bus. On that Harborne bus lane, we've seen 4,000 more passengers a week using those buses routes that go on that bus lane. But it doesn't always have to be a bus lane. People don't really like bus lanes and people kick off. Solihull, in between the kind of the hospital and the town centre, there's a roundabout and the buses just kind of go straight through it like hamburger. That speeds them up. It's all good. Even enforcement of parking restrictions can speed up the buses. You know, so many of our buses are stuck behind things that shouldn't be parked where they are. So also, those key workers are the people that are affected by the air quality. The government's own figures shows that groups more affected by air pollution are older people, children, communities in area of higher pollution, such as close to busy roads, and low-income communities. These are bus users. Government figures show that bus use declines by income. So basically, the richer you are, the less likely you are to get on the bus. Bus users we have a weird target market because it's younger people and older people, and not so much the people in the middle. So bus users, key workers, people affected by air quality, these are all the same people. So how do we protect these people, these vulnerable people that are also our key workers? And basically, we think the answer is modal shift, getting people out of their cars, onto public transport for the longer journeys, walking and cycling for the shorter journeys to keep traffic off the roads. Now, during the pandemic, there was a bit of a drive from central government to get this to happen, and they brought in the Emergency Active Travel Fund. But there was a slight drawback to this, in that I think it got slightly confused with the avoid public transport to keep space on it message. And I think it got translated in some people's minds as to that you should take away road space from buses and give it to walking and cycling. Luckily, in Birmingham, that wasn't the case. So we sat down with the council and various other agencies and had a few long discussions about how we could bring in the bike lanes, but also make the bus lanes still work and even get the coaches into the coach station. So, given a couple of hours of people with maps around a table, you can actually bring a solution that works for everybody. So I think it's really important going forward. I was really pleased to see Clare on the panel, because I think going forward, walking and cycling and public transport have to all be seen as the answer, and we mustn't kind of let ourselves somehow accidentally get posed as, fighting over road space. You can have all of those things, and all of those things should work with each other. I don't have a car, I'm a cyclist, and I'm a bus user. I'm both. I'm not one or the other. And I love my bike, but at the moment, our buses, even though everyone's supposed to be staying at home, our buses are still carrying 500,000 people every day across the West Midlands. Much as I love cycling, I don't think we're going to see 500,000 people cycling around the West Midlands every single day, especially when it's like today. So I think to make a dent in the NOx figures and the PM figures, and also carbon, we do need to understand that bus is the thing that shifts the volumes, and walking and cycling are great, but they're not going to do it on their own. You just need those hundreds of thousands of people to change their behaviour. The other thing I think we maybe need is a little less obsession with kind of tech for tech's sake. Obviously, we were thrilled about Birmingham and their hydrogen announcement. We're really, really, really looking forward to operating them and finding out what they can really do. Very, very excited. And obviously, we have bought our last diesel bus. We've got our 29 fully electrics. And we will be fully Euro 6 by mid-2021, with the first city region to say that we're going to do that. We're kind of retrofitting the old buses, so even if you see an old bus on the street, the engine in there will have a brand new exhaust system. That means it's practically zero emissions. It's not certified, but it's kind of pretty close. So one of our key takeaways, I think, is that getting on a bus, any bus, even if it's an older bus, is still better than driving everywhere in a car on your own. Even if it's an older bus, it may well be retrofitted, and even if it hasn't been yet, it's still better because it carries more people. I think this obsession with tech means that a lot of people are kind of touting electric cars as the answer. I can't see how they are the answer. They're part of the answer. I think it's very tempting because it means that nobody has to change their behaviour, which is hard, as Claire was saying. I noticed the article in the Times today for Clean Air Day by the Transport Secretary and the Business Secretary makes no mention of buses. The only public transport they talk about is hydrogen trains because it's tech. But we're not convinced that electric cars will solve everything, because I don't think it will happen fast enough. We need to start meeting our especially carbon targets now. Excuse me. We're not sure the grid will be ready for every single person to be driving around in an electric vehicle imminently. As somebody else said, we've still got congestion. We don't want cities full of electric cars, just like we don't want cities full of diesel cars. Just because of the congestion and the quality of your streets, you don't necessarily want that. You've still got particulate matter, whereas bus, for those 4 tyres, you're carrying 75 people without social distancing, as Claire was saying about PM. And once we've got more electric buses are a way more efficient use of the power of the grid. And if the grid isn't going to be upscaled in time, that's the way to go. A bus uses the same energy as 6 electric cars to do a kilometre. So on that bus, you've got 3 times more passengers as those 6 electric cars. So per kind of whatever it is of energy, that's a better use of getting more people that kilometre. And then again, back to my title, we think this is an inequality issue. The OLEV research on electric cars says the majority of EV users are currently male, aged 40 to 69, tertiary educated, affluent, and have access to 2 cars or more. So all the resource and the kind of publicity and the drive into electric cars is essentially to kind of benefit privileged people, and can often be at the expense of your more deprived people, which, as we've established, tend to be bus users. And similarly to what Claire said, we think everyone has the right to live without a car. You should be able to go to work, get a job, go to college without having to buy a car. So we think this is an opportunity, this horrible pandemic, to keep the traffic off the roads, give priority to sustainable travel, protect air quality, and reduce the inequalities in health and access to opportunities. People want this, they do want it now. A recent survey of 7,000 people by TFWM showed that the 3 things people want as a legacy of this pandemic are cleaner air, quieter roads, and a better work-life balance. The way to do all those things is modal shift. Bus has the volumes we need to hit those targets. It's really quick to adapt. You know, a bus can be built in 5 weeks. A route can be registered in 70 days. It's cheap. We've seen some great bus measures in the emergency transport plan, starting off in tranche 1, just as, you know, cones and water bollards, you know, you can make it permanent later. You can change the behaviour now if you've just got, you know, some cones and some water bollards. It's the fairest way that we can move forward. So, as a spokesperson for the bus industry, buses are ready and waiting. Buses are for everyone. Welcome aboard.
Thank you very much, Ali. That was a really helpful perspective, and I think we certainly are. I'm not anyway, speaking personally, looking interested in seeing arguments between different elements of the modal shift team, family, community, whatever we want to call ourselves, rather than thinking about how everything might be able to play its part, every mode. Okay, and I think the connection of COVID and clean air and mobility was a really helpful one. Perhaps we'll get back to that in the panel discussion, and not just COVID, but health vulnerabilities of all kinds, and clean air and mobility. But moving on to the last of our speakers, I want to introduce now Shivaji Shiva. So Shivaji is a lawyer. He's the charities partner at law firm VWB, and also a very active charity trustee, including Cycle Works, which is an employer-led campaign organisation, and a resident-led campaign called Our Bourneville. So really looking forward to hearing Shivaji's perspective. Thank you. Over to you.
Oops. Okay, so I hope you can all now hear me and see the screen. Great. So I'm here with the title about introducing you to community activity. So it's only fair to say that I don't represent all community activity around clean air across Birmingham. In fact, I don't represent any one campaign with just that aim. But as my profile probably makes clear, I do get around on a bike quite a lot. And what I hope to do in the 10 minutes that I've got is to tell you a bit about 2 organisations locally, Our Bourneville, which is that resident-led campaign that you can see on the slide there, pushing for a low traffic neighbourhood in the south of Birmingham, and Cycling Works for Birmingham, which is an employer-led group that is really encouraging all of the employers across the region to get together and say, we want for our staff a safe way to get to work. So if they would like to cycle, we would like them to have a safe cycleway from home to wherever they work. And especially those in the city centre where it ought to be obvious that we can do that. And we've already got fantastic examples like the cycleway along the A38 from my bit of South Birmingham into the city centre. So just to kind of move on and say a little bit more about those 2 groups, let me introduce you to Keith, who is a resident. And what Keith did in this quote for the postcard you see there is to tell us a bit about what he, his partner, and their 3-year-old really valued about lockdown. And as we heard from other speakers, it just gave them a glimpse of what the future could be. The The noise of birds is something that I've heard of from a lot of neighbours over the last few months, a great deal more than I ever spoke to me about birds at any point in my past. There was also lack of traffic and just that sociable feeling that came without the division that traffic inevitably brings. That sense that means that if you live on a busy road, you're much less likely to know your neighbours than if you live on a quieter road where it's simply easier to safely walk up the road to see them. And although it's not on that postcard, Keith has also talked to me about air pollution, about enjoying the fact that you could smell Bourneville surrounds in a completely different way, without the dominant smell of traffic that we don't always recognise, but is often there. We've also got a range of businesses that are involved in the Our Bourneville story, but I should probably backtrack and tell you where we started. And essentially that was as a group of concerned parents. In the summer of last year, the summer of 2019, long before the pandemic or the lockdown, we got together and we were grumbling in our different ways about how challenging it is to get around the area. And amongst that, there were a number of parents who have children or other relatives that have asthma and other conditions that made them want to seek cleaner air. The two came together, we used on the low traffic neighbourhood idea that was then beginning to be publicised after the experiment in Waltham Forest in London, where it had been brilliant. If you fast forward then to May this year, when we were all just getting used to lockdown, we were beginning to see that Keith effect, the fact that lots of our neighbours were talking to us about what the area could be like. And we were therefore delighted to work with the council as it responded to the 9th May announcement that you see referred to there from Grant Shapps. As within 4 weeks, the council said, we've got an emergency transport plan. We are going to deliver lots of these schemes, despite the relatively limited funding available. And one of those just might, be a low traffic neighbourhood in Bourneville. Now that didn't come to Bourneville in phase 1, but we're delighted to see them going in Lozells, in Kings Heath and elsewhere. And we're hoping that we'll see something in Bourneville in the next phase. And the other thing I wanted to highlight at this point is if you see those various quotes from the government over time and without labouring them, one of the things that you ended up with was this really strong sense that we should make a change. I'd love to think that all of our politicians across the city and the region will get behind that, whichever political stripe they might be. I then wanted to dwell just briefly on our vision for Bourneville. This is not a plan of any sort, but it is just a vision, a drawing from our Bourneville member Naomi Fisher, a local architect. We tried to imagine what we could do to this junction, Maryvale Road in Bourneville, where it meets Linden Road, which is a really troublesome road to get across, as many of you will know, and which could be transformed in so many ways by managing traffic and contributing to the modal shift that several speakers this evening have talked about. If people could walk up to their local shops or cycle there, rather than getting the car out for one of those journeys of under a mile that Waseem referred to earlier, one of those almost a quarter journeys, then wouldn't that be brilliant? So the final thing I want to do, or the penultimate thing I want to do is tell you how you can get in touch with us. The first is that our Bourneville would be delighted to see people follow them on Twitter at Bourneville Hour. On Twitter, it's actually Bourneville Hour rather than Our Bourneville, but you'll find us, or at the Our Bourneville group on Facebook, and to begin to join the conversation. If you can't find either of those links, get in touch with me and I'll happily pass you on. The other immediate way that you can get involved is to get your employer to make contact with Cycling Works for Birmingham. There's a website, cyclingworks.co.uk. It would take them about 5 minutes if you can find the right decision maker to sign up and support that website and send a clear message to our decision makers across the city that what we want, what employers want, as well as residents, is to see this shift towards sustainable transport and transport that is critically much less polluting. And then the final thing I wanted to do before winding up was just highlight 2 other community groups which I'm not directly involved in. One of those is Footsteps, Faiths for a Low Carbon Future here in Birmingham, which is a local group of faiths working together who are right now about to begin their own webinar So that's a great example of local clean air action and engagement. And once we've finished our questioning, you might want to join them for the last half of their webinar, which will go on until 8:30. So that's footsteps and taking action right now for clean air. And then the other one was a piece of research passed me by Mums for Lungs and one of the local Birmingham activists, who reminded us that Asthma UK and the British Lung Foundation have today released research saying that there are 580, that is 42% of the schools and colleges in the city are within an area of illegal pollution. If that's not a reason to act in one of the ways I've outlined, I don't know what is. Thank you very much.
That's terrific. Thank you so much, Shivaji. Mums for lungs. Yeah, no, now that I say it out loud, it's slightly easier to say than breeds, which is really, really difficult to say. Thanks so much. Now, if we can just bring everyone back into more of an all-round discussion. Suzanne Bartington's been doing a fab job just fielding questions and answers, and so let's see what that's brought us to. So the first one is from Lauren Wilcock, and excuse us that we're not able to ping pong around to actually have you say these questions yourselves. I think it'd be a little bit easier if we just read them out. So the question is, do you think it will now swing the other way as people are becoming wary of using public transport now that the increases in COVID-19 exposure, the risk is being perceived to increase again? I'm going to ask for a hand actually from one of our speakers. I'm tempted to go to Ali as the bus expert, but yeah, shall we start with that, and then just if anyone else would like to chime in, let's take it from there. So Ali.
Yeah, so I think what we've now seen, partly from the beginning of lockdown and also from a few weeks ago when we were then all told to work from home again, is that there is a real hardcore of people who don't have the choice. They don't have a car. They have to get to work, or they have to get to where they need to go. They have to go to the supermarket, and they have to use public transport. You know, when the Prime Minister said you will need to not go to work unless you have to, again, you know, you must work from home unless you can't. Our patronage figures barely changed. They didn't change that week, and they haven't changed since. So I think we think that our customers don't have loads and loads of choices about how they get everywhere. So I think obviously there's discretionary travel, and people are probably not, you know, going to the cinema or just going out as much. But I think it's not as we've not seen it change as much as the rail industry. And I think the West Midlands, and especially Birmingham, we've still got the highest bus patronage figures in the country. So I think there's something about Birmingham and the West Midlands which has a real kind of bunch of people that have to go on the bus.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting. It's very important not to just come up with blanket generalizations for the country. I think you've made that point very eloquently a number of times, Ali, in terms of where we are in the West Midlands and in Birmingham, perhaps particularly, and versus perspectives you might get from other vantage points socially and geographically. Would anyone else like to speak to that idea of you know, how averse people might be, or whether it's going to push us back into our private vehicle bubbles, or are people happy to move on?
Just one comment maybe from me, Robert, if that's okay. And that's just to pick up one of the other questions, or one of the other issues that comes up, which is the idea that you can't walk or cycle if there's rain. And I think we all know that we don't melt if we get wet. What not everyone listening to this might know is that it's great fun to cycle in the rain. You can choose your method. You can decide you're just going to get wet and enjoy it, or you can wear things to keep you dry, and it's no more complicated than picking up a coat. And of course, the other thing is that if you measure over a year, it's very, very rare that the rain coincides with the 20 minutes you're on a bike.
Okay, let's start a hashtag for those who love cycling and walking in the rain. Yeah, my son was out walking the length and breadth of Sutton Park in the very wet weather over the weekend, and I think once you get beyond a certain point, you either start enjoying it or you get out, get away from it. Okay, thanks very much for that, Shivaji. Yeah, that's a useful perspective. I think we should move on. And the next one is a directed question for Bill. So I think just technically, if we'd not had the exceptionally good weather in March to May, would local pollution have been worse or better given the lockdown? I think is the question.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So I think that's quite a simple one actually to answer at a first level, which is it would have been worse. So the pollution levels we have in the air are basically a function of how much stuff gets released into the air and then how it's mixed in the air. And if the weather is worse, it'll tend to be windier in the UK, and those emissions are diluted to a greater extent. And when the weather's worse in the UK, the air tends to come from the southwest across the Atlantic Ocean. So it tends to be reasonably clean air arriving to start with. So if we'd had those sort of southwesterly weather conditions, wet and windy weather, we'd have seen lower pollution levels, although we might not have perceived it as such. And that perception is quite an important point of the story we're talking about in this conversation.
Yes, thanks, Bill. And that perception goes back to the point Shivaji was making about reconnecting to the environment, which I think is a really important one. Certainly colleagues in the university here in psychology are very interested in that cognitive element of how we connect into our with our environment, urban or otherwise, and what that does for our health and well-being. So it's not simply a sense of it has a mind-body connection. Makes a difference. Thanks ever so much, Bill. Sandra Haynes has brought up a very important point about mobility, which I'll perhaps direct towards Clare. Yeah, I could see your hand going up immediately. Thanks, Clare. So the question is just about people with more restricted mobility who perhaps can't cycle and may be able to walk only short distances. And what's the solution for them?
Yeah, I wanted to come on that one because we've done this really interesting project in the Tyburn area of Birmingham called Age Friendly Tyburn. And I mentioned it in the presentation. That's where we've worked with people, older people, so people over the age of 50, to look at the built environment and how we can overcome some of the barriers that are in place to people feeling like they can walk and cycle in their neighbourhood, with a view to look at isolation and tackling that. And that report, it's recently come up with a report, and there's some really strong recommendations in there about things like, there's really simple things we can do, like changing the crossing times to raise people's confidence that they can get across safely, having good crossings and then good crossing times, things like having benches somewhere for people to rest, having shelter from the rain, having access to public toilets is a really important thing, or toilets that people can use even if they're not public. There's just loads of things like that, really good signage and wayfinding. And letting people know about quieter routes like canal routes and things that might not otherwise be known to people. And I think Sandra mentioned maintenance. That's really important. Our community group actually got in there and started cutting back hedges, and it doubled the width of the pavement to suddenly make something which felt quite frightening to next to fast, busy traffic to feel much more welcoming. So there's loads of kind of quite low cost things that can be done to really support people in that. And I would also just add that a lot of older people do cycle, and there's some great groups like Cycling Without Age. So obviously everyone's got different things that they're capable of doing, but there's loads of older people that really enjoy the health benefits of being out on a bike as well.
Claire, it's great to hear you talk about Cycling Without Age, because I don't know if you know, but I've been involved in trying to get that here to the UK. But I want to make 2 points. First is I introduced Keith earlier. I could also introduce John Bennett, who's an 84-year-old who lives in Bourneville and who can't walk very well these days. So he says he's been cycling in the area for 40 years. He's been walking in the area for 40 years. He can no longer walk much more than a couple of 100 yards with any ease, but he can cycle. And with the help of an e-bike, as it happens, he can cycle quite easily. So he's still going around. I met him outside the front of my garden as he was doing one of his rounds. And for him, it's a form of freedom. I think it's important to remember that quite a high proportion of people using cycling are actually cycling in part as a mobility aid. And the other thing is that every person who does need to drive, and I'm not going to argue that there aren't any that do, benefits if what we do is ease off from the roads those people who do want to use other forms or are able to, so we can get out of the way. And I know that John is glad to.
People who really need it, and that was that's a good point in terms of mobility that yourself and Clare have been making. But Ali was making that point also in terms of equity and those people who use public transport, because that's what they need to do, and we need to get out of their way too. I don't know if Waseem, if you're just chime in if there's anything you want to respond to so far. Otherwise, I'll move on. How do you?
So there's one or two questions in the question and answer section, that the chat section that I said I'll respond to live. One of them was about how do we as communities engage with councillors, because councillors, politicians are always thinking about elections, and I think it's really important for people to understand that when some councillors are absolutely brave and bold and understand the importance of it, and they understand the importance of reversing health inequalities and improving the quality of life for residents. Some I've always got one eye on elections and polling. I think it's really important that you contact and lobby your elected members, whether that's MPs or councillors. And what we've seen in the tranche 1 of the Active Travel Fund is there's been quite a few organised communities who've been objecting to a pop-up cycle lane, in a way hounding local councillors, and councillors are getting nervous. So if you are somebody who wants to see more provision around cycling, if you're somebody who wants to see low traffic neighbourhoods, drop your councillor an email. It's always sort of refreshing to see local residents lobbying for something that you're also passionate about. So I think that's really important. And the other question I said I'll respond to is around work in schools. The council's mode shift stars engagement with schools is really impressive. But if you're a governor or a parent at a school, go and ask your school whether they've signed up for it, because not all schools in Birmingham have signed up to the mode shift stars work. And we're really keen to introduce school streets and more provision within local schools. But the first point of call is that we want local schools to sign up to the mode shift stars work that we do, which is looking at how we can educate and empower young people and school communities to use more sustainable forms of transport to school and from school too.
Thank you very much for that, Waseem. Clare, did you want to respond to either of those points around what we should be doing around schools and the points around local democracy and local governance and societal conversation?
Yeah, thank you. We think our schools programmes are a really important part of the work we do in our behaviour change side of things. So we don't have an active schools project in Birmingham at the moment, but that's partly because I think the council's already delivering quite a lot of it themselves. But it's really important part of the culture change and engaging young people at an early age, so that it's not just doing the cycle skills training, but it's part of the culture change, so they understand the benefits of active travel, of sustainable travel and public transport, so they understand air quality issues. We kind of go out we take children out and do air quality walks. We kind of do loads of really interactive and engaging things, because it is so important to engage at a young age. And the school streets movement is a really important initiative as well. And I'm so pleased to hear that Birmingham is doing so much of that, because that completely transforms the environment outside of school. And fear and safety concerns are one of the biggest deterrents and barriers to parents letting their children travel actively to school. And so by having that immediate kind of safe environment outside of the school, that's really key. And there's things you can do, if that's really tricky, you can do things like park and stride to open it up to more people. So if you have to travel by car because you're a long way away, do a bit of it by car and then walk that final stretch, or scoot or cycle that final stretch. And that just makes a huge difference. And there's so much stuff we can do. And that does require some engagement from the council, but often parent volunteers or staff volunteers in schools can be the people that go out there and put those signs, those barriers down. It doesn't need a lot. You do need your TRO to be your traffic regulation order to be in place, but it doesn't need a huge amount to make it successful actually, and it has a huge impact. And just on democracy.
Thanks very much for that, Clare. I think we're going to come back to some ideas around safety, because there's quite a lot of stuff in the question and answers around safety. So I'd like to come back to that. I'm just going to put a call out here for if anyone can actually do the calculations to persuade me that scooting is a sensible mode of travel. Not the ones with motors in them, but the ones you have to power yourself, because I've never really been convinced that it's worth the effort. But I'd actually like to go towards something a little bit more technical, because there is a question from Phil Calls that I think it's for Bill really, about the evidence, because we need the data, we need the hard data. And could the panel recommend personal air quality measurement devices or apps that we can all use to record and measure air quality in our daily lives as part of our engagement? Bill, do you want to take that one up?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I'll attempt to do so. So yeah, there are increasingly what are generally termed low-cost sensors for measuring air quality, which are touted around for people to use in their homes and assess their personal exposure. And there's a range of companies that are producing these. And I know Sustrans have some which they lend out to various projects and things as well. I'm loath to get into specific models and things. I think the general observation I'd make is our experience is they tend to do a reasonably good job for particulate matter, for PM, but they tend to be much more challenging for measurements of NO2. And in particular, some of them we've seen suffer from interferences with other species in the air. So I think you can get things that'll do a reasonable job for PM if you're looking at spending 200-300 quid, that sort of price point. But NO2 we're more cautious about at the moment.
Thanks very much for that, Bill. Yeah, so good for particles, but very big question marks over some of these chemical sensors. I was smiling as Bill was speaking, not because of what he was saying, but because I saw the comment taking the mickey out of me about scooters. And all I would say in my defense is that for a small child, the weight of the scooter is an even bigger fraction of the total weight compared to, say, me scooting. So the maths must be even worse. So can we go now to modal shift? We have a question from Robert Gudger, directed at you, Ali, as you might imagine, thinking about modal shift, about buses. So these 6.5 litre diesel bus engines have in the past been a major pollution contributor. What about bus deregulation? So yeah, the technology is all very well, but what about bus deregulation? Ali, have you got a...
I think so. If I understand Robert's question right, so I would say that we have retrofitted over 600 of our older buses with new exhaust systems, so that the air coming out of the back is just as clean as a Euro 6, not quite as clean as an electric, but nearly. They, compared with buying a new bus, are pretty cheap. Obviously, we buy it in bulk, but you can do that on your buses as an investment into cleaner air. Obviously, Birmingham's got the clean air zone. Places like Solihull and Wolverhampton have got air quality partnerships, which mean that you can't go into the centre of, you can't use the bus station, you can't go into the centre of those cities and as a bus operator without having a certain level of Euro standard, so the clean standard of your engines. There is funding available for things like that. Every so often the DFT comes out and says you can apply for this funding to retrofit your buses with these kits that make the exhausts cleaner. There's often money available for the electric vehicles, which, as Councillor Zaffar was saying, you know, are kind of twice as expensive as a normal bus. But as a big PLC, we're finding that increasingly to get your shareholders to invest in your company in the last year has massively changed, so that your kind of environmental position and what you're actually doing, you know, it can't be greenwash. They look into what you're actually doing, has become something that is attractive to investors and shareholders and pension funds. And I think that's really, really changed in the last couple of years, and it will change a lot more going forward. So I think I read something the other day, and I can't remember what it was about, you know, kind of Shell and things kind of struggling to, you know, to keep up, and you don't want to look like you're kind of a part of the past and that you're a pollutant. You know, to get your shareholders to invest in you, you have to be part of the future, and you have to be clean, and you have to be about cleaning up the environment. So I think deregulation, weirdly, is putting a lot of that pressure on a lot of PLCs to make those changes, because otherwise you're going to lose out and they'll invest in somebody else.
Okay, so it's the activist investors and corporate social responsibility that's going to
Yes. And you have to be very clear now. You have to write all this stuff down and evidence it. It's not enough just to kind of go, oh yes, we're green. They study all the things about what you're doing. So it's quite tough now to prove that you're doing the do.
That's great. Can I just, is there anyone else who wants to come in on buses? Otherwise, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for a short technical detour into zero, what we mean by zero emissions, and then I'm going to come back to fear and change as our final topic. So just to come back to this thing about what do we mean by zero emission? Bill, do you want to kick us off? I mean, I think Michael be on there.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So the question was, do we consider electric vehicles to be genuinely zero emission? And I guess there's two sides to that. We would try and slightly more precisely call them zero emission at tailpipe or zero exhaust emission, in that there isn't an engine inside the vehicle burning things and generating NOx and PM, but there are still emissions associated with that vehicle on the road, which come from sources like the brake wear, the tyre wear, and resuspension of particles from the road surface. And it's quite complicated, the different interactions of those different sources. So electric vehicles tend to be heavier, but equally they tend to use regenerative braking. So we can argue which way those factors win out. And then the second aspect is where the electricity comes from that powers the electric vehicle. And if that's derived from a renewable source, or if it's derived from a fossil fuel source, and that will lead to different air quality and climate impacts associated with it. And then finally, there's the life cycle cost of production and disposal, and the battery particularly embedded within that. I'll stop there, but I don't know if Rob wants to carry on with some of those stories.
Not particularly. I think it is important just to get those things out, because zero emission is I suppose from our academic point of view, is sometimes not entirely helpful phraseology. But I don't know if any of the other panelists would like to say anything about that, or just that sense that it isn't going to finish when everything goes electric or hydrogen for that matter. Because if you're taking tons of metal down a metals road, then there will be particulate emissions. And
can I just say something very quickly?
Waseem, please come in.
So if we were to replace every single diesel or petrol car with an electric or a hydrogen car, you still have congestion in the city, you still have air pollution in the city, you still will have unhealthy commuters. And we know that in Birmingham pre-COVID, congestion in Birmingham costs, I think, what the Greater Birmingham Chamber of Commerce was saying, £12 million a week to the local economy. And then we're also expected to see a rise in population. So if the current culture, car-dependent culture continues in Birmingham, if you've got congestion pre-COVID now, if you've got, if we had the level of traffic we had before, then imagine what it'd be like if people continue to use car and we have that increase in population. So I think we've really got to look at more sustainable modes of traveling through our cities, and active travel for shorter journeys and mass transit systems for the slightly longer journeys.
That you couldn't have done that better if you tried, Waseem. That has segued us marvelously into a sort of final wrap-up set of comments from you all in the panel. And just to frame those, we'll use Louisa Orsini, my colleague Louisa Orsini's comment, just as it's not something to, I'm not looking for a very direct answer. I'm looking for a wrap up from you all, but just around fear and behaviour change. So during the lockdown, Louisa says, fear changed people's behaviour. Any idea how we can encourage positive behaviour without fear? What may encourage people to be more healthy? So Waseem, do you want, since I think you were on a bit of a roll there, how about you start, and then I'll go around my Zoom board in clockwise direction. So Bill will be next.
I think people are more conscious about their health because we're living in a pandemic, and I think making people understand the health benefits of using sustainable modes of transport. So I gave up my car a couple of years ago. So we reduced a car in the household. I share a car in my house, but I use the buses. I walk to the bus stops. I walk from the bus stop when I get off to my place of work. I use my bike, not as much as I should, but I think just understanding the health benefits to using for walking, for cycling and public transport, and how they outweigh the health benefits from just driving everywhere, whether it's half a mile or 20 miles in the city, will get people thinking about the positive impact it'll have on their health.
So maybe it's just taking those first few steps or pedals is the thing that bursts that fear of the unknown.
The 10,000 steps on this, achieving that by walking and using public transport is far easier than driving everywhere.
Thank you very much. Bill.
Yeah, I mean, coming from the question, I mean, clearly coronavirus is a terrible thing. But I think also in the air quality context we're talking about this evening, it showed us what's possible. And I think that's the most significant thing for me. It's shown what a big change can be and what some of the consequences can be to different ways of living our lives. And maybe that makes us a little more amenable to some of the substantive changes that are going to be necessary to realise the health benefits from the transport shifts we've been discussing.
Thank you very much, Bill. Yeah. Ali.
So I think what we found from TFWM have done a lot of surveys, we've done a lot of surveys, Transport Focus, the national group, have done a lot of surveys, and I think the thing that we all found and the thing that we've observed is it's very easy to get yourself into a state and fear something that you haven't done for a few months. You know, we're all cocooned in our houses, and then when we do a new thing that we haven't done for ages, it's quite scary. So it's quite interesting. All the confidence levels in bus travel are way higher in people that do travel by bus, and the people that haven't travelled by bus for a while or yet are much more nervous about it. So I think what we found is, you know, once people have done it once and once they've made the jump, then they relax and they go, oh yeah, this is fine. I know how to do this. It's okay. So what we've been trying to tell people is kind of, you know, take your time. We're here for you. We're doing everything that we can to keep it safe. We're ready. You know, we've been running the whole of lockdown. You may not have been on our services, but we've been doing it every day. We know what we're doing. When you're ready, you know, take your time. Don't do it in a rush. Make a plan. You know, have a little trial. And I think we're finding that once people have done it once, they're fine and the fear goes away, and then they start worrying about the next thing that they haven't done for ages, like going to the cinema or whatever.
Toe in the water.
Exactly. Give it a try.
Shivaji, any final remarks?
Sure. I guess the place to start is I spend a lot of time banging on about the social and environmental benefits of walking and cycling. All the time. My wife calls me evangelical about it and wanders away when I start talking. And I just want to say that the reason I do it isn't about any of that. It's because it's great fun. And that's not just cycling. It's not even just walking. It's even down to the campaigning, the kind of getting out and chatting to neighbours and talking to the people who disagree with me and tell me I must be loony, because eventually it normally turns to something better.
Oh, Shivaji, not just advocacy for a healthy, active lifestyle, but advocacy for participation in democracy. What more could we ask for at this time of an evening in the run-up to an England match? So, Claire, you've got a very short time, I'm afraid, but your final thoughts and remarks before I hand over to Suzanne to close.
Thanks. I think, you know, to achieve behaviour change without fear, I think there's three things we can do. I think we can make it really attractive, make the alternatives to car use really attractive, safe and convenient, and you can do that through really good segregated infrastructure. I think you can make it harder for people to travel by cars, and that might be through traffic demand management, it might be through low traffic neighbourhoods and design of place. And the third thing is I think you create behaviour change through helping people over those barriers. So that can be support, it could be getting someone a free reconditioned bike so they can afford it, it could be advice on routes if they don't know how to use maps and don't feel confident, or it could be just making people feel like cycling and walking is for people like them. Like not everyone feels that, and it's kind of broadening that out and broadening that reach and just bringing people in and supporting whatever the barriers are, and that can achieve.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you for bringing us back to some real concrete places there, Claire, and just seeing the panel in front of me as I can now. I mean, look how diverse you are. I mean, that's great. You know these are people like us. Surely, I'm going to stop now and hand over to the real brains behind this event, Suzanne Bartington, to do the closing remarks. Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you, Rob. And I know that we are very short of time, but I just want to say what an extraordinary contribution this has been from all of the panel. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground. I think 2020 has been an extraordinary year in many regards, reflected in the content this evening. And we really have seen, seen communities on the brink of crisis. But I think there is a positive element to this, and there is a consensus here that we recognise the potential benefits, the potential benefits to build a cleaner and healthier future, locally, regionally, nationally, internationally. And I think it's really important to consider that, given we are being hosted by the Institute for Global Innovation this evening. We know that over 5 million premature deaths each year are caused by air pollution worldwide, and we've also observed that very dramatic change that can happen and can give us that clarity of a different future. So I think there is a consensus that there is a sense that change can take place, and I want to say thank you to all of our speakers this evening, Bill Bloss, Waseem Zaffar, Clare Maltby, Ali Bell and Shivaji Shiva, thank you. And thank you to Rob Mackenzie for chairing our debate. I also would like to thank the Institute for Global Innovation, who have hosted this event under our Clean Air theme, and a link to that theme will go up at the end of this event. So please do have a look at our website. I'd also like to thank those who've worked behind the scenes here, Alex Young and Sue Gilligan, who've supported this event, and our partners, Global Action Plan, who've also assisted with live streaming their event as part of the Clean Air Day Live after hours event. What a fantastic way to end Clean Air Day, a day of action for clean air. So thank you all.
Thank you.